Hello, my name is Robert D. Kaplan. I'm the Chief Geopolitical Analyst for Stratfor, and I'm joined here today with Tack, who's a military analyst for Stratfor. We're going to be talking about the Ukraine, what's going on there, what's the latest. It seems that it is settled into a stalemate between Russian-supported troops and Ukrainian troops in eastern Ukraine, and we're going to try to get a sense here in this conversation about where we're going. Sim, why don't we start by you updating the audience about the military situation on the ground today in eastern Ukraine?
So basically the situation we're in right now is that the Ukrainian military offensive that started on July 4th has kind of ground to a halt. There were some major attempts to encircle the cities of Luhansk and Donetsk, but rebels have shown very resilient in breaking those encirclements. And Ukrainian forces in certain locations have actually ended up in counter-envelopments and are now facing their own significant problems. And on top of that, we're facing the issue where most of the Ukrainian military, pretty much all of its combat forces, have been committed to a significant degree in this Eastern European battle space.
Right. So it seems as if the Russians who looked to be in a bad position a few weeks ago, or rather President Vladimir Putin, who seemed to be on the ropes a few weeks ago, at least in this context, has now regained his footing in a way. Now, is this new found strength by the separatists and the Russians supporting them, is this the result of Russian aggression into eastern Ukraine? Is it a result of the Ukrainians not doing as well as they had hoped? Is it a result really of the Ukrainians having done the easy stuff a few weeks ago and now are in a harder position in more closed, crowded areas? In other words, give us a sense of what the Russians have been doing in the past few weeks to improve their situation.
So it's really a case of both, where Ukraine has initially been doing the easy stuff and now reached a point where they have to stretch out their forces to continue the offensive, putting them in a weaker position. And at the same time, when Russia noticed that the separatist movements were getting into a bit of a pickle, they really started pushing equipment and supplies and reinforcements into the area very heavily. And that support has directly translated into limited gains recently, and especially their ability to challenge the Ukrainian offensive moves.
Yes, I would say that Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, has to do two things. He has to retain his high popularity, but he has to do it without an over dramatic Russian invasion and involvement, because that would be unpopular at home, or potentially unpopular. So what he seems to be doing is squaring the circle by having a gradual buildup of Russian logistical and other help to the separatists, so that it is a Russian push into eastern Ukraine, but it's not dramatic, so that it remains on page 3, so that Putin does not have to worry about increased sanctions for the West, and he doesn't have to get his own people at home, the Russian masses, nervous. And yet at the same time, he can change the correlation of forces in eastern Ukraine. So this helps him politically, it helps him militarily. And meanwhile, he will do everything he can to undermine the government, the Ukrainian government in the capital of Kiev.
Yes, and this plays directly into the concept of what people are now calling the opaque war, which is what we saw in Crimea earlier, with unofficial military assistance, buildups of forces, and that's the same thing we're seeing in eastern Ukraine now. We've seen Ukraine and NATO come out and confirm the actual presence of Russian forces inside Ukraine, as well as the whole background of equipment and munitions being delivered to the rebels. But at the same time, it's not evolving into an official overt invasion.
Right. And I think we're going to see a different dynamic play out as we get into winter. because we're going to get into mud season. It's going to slow down both sides. The sides are going to be in more of a fixed position than they're in now. It's going to be less fluid. And also the Russians will have the added advantage of putting more pressure of hydrocarbon deliveries to Ukraine as it gets cold and Ukraine needs more and more natural gas for home heating. Well, that's as far as we're going to take it today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Robert Kaplan at Stratfor.